When I was in college, me and my best friend, who I'll call John for privacy reasons, were the kind of guys who lived for adrenaline rushes. We weren't stupid in an academic sense, but we definitely made some questionable decisions when it came to seeking thrills. Our dorm room was like mission control for planning our next stupid adventure, whether it was exploring abandoned buildings, climbing water towers, or sneaking into places we definitely shouldn't have been. This particular night started like any other. We were sitting in our room around 10 p.m., complaining about how boring our small college town was. The most exciting thing that had happened all week was when the pizza place ran out of pepperoni. That's when John suggested we finally check out the woods behind our town, the area that everyone always warned people to stay away from. See, our town was completely surrounded by forest, but there was this one section that nobody ever talked about. The backwoods, as locals called them, were where a massive fire had torn through decades ago. The entire residential area back there had been evacuated and never rebuilt. Houses just sat there, charred and crumbling, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Because of this, the forest behind that abandoned section had become this forgotten wilderness that even the most adventurous locals avoided. We'd driven past the edge of that area plenty of times, seeing the rusty warning signs and the overgrown driveways that led to nothing but foundations and ash. But we'd never actually walked through it, let alone ventured into the woods beyond. Tonight felt different, though. Maybe it was the full moon casting everything in that eerie silver light, or maybe we were just more restless than usual. We packed our backpacks with flashlights, some snacks, and bottled water. The plan was simple: walk through the burnt section of town, find where the forest began, and see what was out there. It sounded harmless enough, especially compared to some of our previous adventures that had nearly gotten us arrested. The walk to the back of town took about 30 minutes from campus. As we got closer, the streetlights became fewer and farther between until they disappeared entirely. The houses went from well-maintained to run down to completely abandoned. By the time we reached the burnt area, it felt like we'd walked into a different world. The destruction was more extensive than I'd realized. Entire blocks had been reduced to concrete foundations and the occasional chimney stack reaching up like a gravestone. Weeds and small trees had grown up through the cracks in old driveways. It was eerily quiet, with just the sound of our footsteps on broken asphalt and the distant hum of the highway we'd left behind. After about 10 more minutes of walking through this urban wasteland, we finally reached the tree line. The forest looked different here than in other parts of town. The trees seemed older, more gnarled, and they grew closer together. There were no marked trails, no signs indicating hiking paths or nature walks. This was truly wild forest, untouched by the Park Service or any kind of human management. We switched on our flashlights and stepped into the trees. The temperature dropped noticeably as soon as we were under the canopy. Our lights cut through the darkness, but not very far. The forest seemed to absorb the light, creating this bubble of visibility that extended maybe 20 feet in any direction. For the first 20 minutes or so, it was actually kind of peaceful. The initial rush of being in a dark forest at night gave way to a steady rhythm of walking and navigating around trees and over fallen logs. We talked quietly about classes, about girls, about our plans for the weekend, normal college stuff. But then John stopped walking and grabbed my arm. "Do you see that?" he whispered, pointing ahead and slightly to the right. I followed his gaze and saw it immediately. There was a light in the distance, maybe 50 yards away, sitting low to the ground. It wasn't moving, wasn't flickering like a campfire. It was steady and bright, clearly artificial. "Is that someone's flashlight?" I asked, though I already knew it had to be. We approached carefully, our own lights trained on the mysterious glow. As we got closer, it became obvious that's exactly what it was. A standard black flashlight sitting upright on the forest floor with no one around it. The area around the flashlight was completely empty. No camping gear, no backpack, no signs that anyone had been there recently. The light was bright and steady, which meant it had to have fresh batteries. Someone had either dropped it or placed it there very recently, probably within the last few hours. "Who just leaves a flashlight in the middle of the woods?" John asked, echoing my own thoughts. I picked it up and examined it. It was a nice flashlight, probably $40 or $50 new. The kind of thing you don't just abandon unless something made you run. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Maybe someone dropped it and they're looking for it, I suggested, though I didn't really believe it. If you dropped a flashlight in a dark forest, that light would be like a beacon guiding you back to it. Or maybe they dropped it while they were running from something, John said, voicing what we were both thinking. I should have suggested we leave right then. Every instinct I had was telling me that finding an abandoned flashlight in the middle of nowhere was not a good sign. But that little spike of adrenaline, that curiosity about what story this flashlight might tell, kept us moving forward. I switched off the found flashlight and stuck it in my backpack. We decided to continue deeper into the woods, both of us now more alert and listening carefully to every sound around us. Not even 5 minutes after leaving the spot where we found the flashlight, we heard it. A sharp crack, like someone stepping on a large branch. It came from behind us, maybe 30 or 40 feet back. We both stopped and turned around, sweeping our flashlights across the trees. Nothing, just more trees and darkness beyond our light's reach. Probably just an animal, I said, but my voice sounded thin and unconvincing even to me. We kept walking, but now every sound made us pause. A few minutes later, we heard it again. This time it was several cracks in quick succession, like someone moving quickly through the undergrowth. Again, it seemed to come from behind us. "That's not an animal," John whispered. "That's definitely footsteps." We stopped and listened for a full minute, but heard nothing else. The forest had gone completely silent, which somehow felt even more ominous than the mysterious sounds. Against our better judgment, we continued forward. The adrenaline was really pumping now, but it wasn't the fun kind we usually sought out. This was fear, plain and simple. The kind of fear that makes your heart race and your palms sweat. Over the next 10 minutes, we heard the same type of sounds at least 5 more times. Always from behind us, always seeming to maintain the same distance. Then we saw it. I had just turned around to scan behind us again when I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. A shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness, ducking behind a large tree trunk just at the edge of our light's reach. "John," I whispered urgently, "there's someone behind that tree." We both trained our flashlights on the tree, a massive oak with a trunk wide enough to hide a person. For several seconds, we saw nothing. Then, slowly, a head appeared from behind the tree, just barely visible in the outer edge of our flashlight beams, but definitely human. The figure was watching us. We didn't wait around to get a better look. Both of us took off running, crashing through the forest as fast as we could manage in the dark. Branches whipped at our faces and roots tried to trip us, but pure terror kept us moving. We ran for what felt like forever, but was probably only about 10 minutes. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, we were both gasping and shaking. We listened carefully, but heard no sounds of pursuit. "We need to get out of here," John panted. I couldn't have agreed more. We used our flashlights to navigate back toward where we thought the edge of the forest was, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. Every shadow looked like a potential threat. Every sound made us freeze in place. It took us almost an hour to find our way out of the woods, and by the time we emerged into the burnt section of town, we were both exhausted and paranoid. We kept looking over our shoulders as we hurried back toward campus. The strangest part was that on our way out, we never saw the spot where we had found the abandoned flashlight. We should have passed right by it, but somehow we missed it entirely. Either we took a completely different route out, or someone had moved the light. When we finally made it back to our dorm room, we were both too wired to sleep. We sat up talking about what had happened, trying to make sense of it. Who had been following us? What did they want? And why had someone abandoned a perfectly good flashlight in the middle of the forest? 3 days later, we got some answers, but they only made the whole experience more disturbing. The campus newspaper ran a small story about a missing person case. A local man in his 30s had been reported missing after telling his roommate he was going to explore the woods behind town. He'd been missing for 4 days, and the last anyone had seen of him was when he left his apartment with a backpack and flashlight. The description of the missing man matched the build of the figure we'd seen hiding behind the tree. But that raised even more questions. If the person following us was the missing man, why had he been hiding from us instead of asking for help? And if it wasn't him, then who was it, and what had happened to the missing man? I still have that flashlight. It's sitting in my desk drawer, and every time I see it, I'm reminded of that night in the woods. Sometimes I wonder if we had stayed longer, if we had tried to make contact with whoever was following us. Would we have become missing persons ourselves? The man was never found. The search was called off after 2 weeks, and the case went cold. But every now and then, I hear rumors from other students who claim to see strange lights in the backwoods at night, or who swear they've seen someone watching them from the tree line. I haven't been back to those woods since that night, and I don't plan to ever go back. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Moving across the country is never easy, but doing it alone in an old car with questionable reliability is asking for trouble. I learned this lesson the hard way during what was supposed to be my final trip between my old home on the West Coast and my new life about 1,000 miles inland. I had made this drive 4 times over the course of 6 months, each time hauling more of my belongings to my new apartment. The route I took went through the northern part of the country, avoiding the major interstates in favor of more scenic back roads that cut through small towns and vast stretches of wilderness. It was beautiful the first couple of times, but by the 4th trip, the novelty had worn off completely. This final journey was meant to be simple. I had just the last bits and pieces crammed into my trunk, mostly books and random items that hadn't fit in the moving truck. The plan was to drive straight through, maybe stopping for one night in a motel if I got too tired. Everything went smoothly for the first 8 hours. I made good time, stopped for gas and food in a small town around 6 p.m., and even managed to take a short nap in my car to recharge for the final push. When I woke up at 9 p.m., I felt refreshed and ready to knock out the remaining 6 hours of driving. But my car had other plans. I was about an hour out of the town where I'd napped when the dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. First, it was just the check engine light, then the oil pressure warning, then lights I'd never seen before were flashing red and yellow. The steering became stiff and unresponsive, and I could hear troubling sounds coming from under the hood. Within 5 minutes, the car was barely running. I knew I couldn't keep driving it without risking a complete breakdown or worse. I managed to guide it off the road onto a gravel shoulder just as the engine started making a grinding noise that definitely wasn't normal. As I sat there in the sudden silence after turning off the engine, I realized just how isolated I was. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with dense forest on both sides. I couldn't see any lights from buildings or towns. The nearest town was at least an hour behind me, and I had no idea how far it was to the next one. I tried my cell phone, but of course there was no signal. These rural highways were notorious dead zones for cellular coverage. I was truly on my own. I got out and popped the hood, though I knew absolutely nothing about car engines. I was hoping for something obvious like a disconnected cable or a loose belt, but everything looked like mechanical gibberish to me. The engine was still ticking and hissing as it cooled down, and I could smell something burning. Standing there in the cool night air, I became acutely aware of how creepy this stretch of road was. The streetlights were spaced so far apart that they created pools of dim light separated by long stretches of darkness. The trees pressed close to the road on both sides, creating walls of black that seemed to absorb sound. It was completely quiet, except for the occasional distant rumble of a truck on some other highway. I remember thinking that it felt like a scene from a horror movie. If this were a film, this would be the moment when something terrible would start to happen to the stranded protagonist. My only hope was to flag down another driver and ask for help, either a ride to the nearest town or at least to use their phone to call for assistance. So I positioned myself next to my car and waited, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. For the first 15 minutes, not a single vehicle passed by. The road was completely dead. I was starting to wonder if anyone ever used this route when I finally saw headlights approaching from the direction I'd come from. I waved my arms to get the driver's attention, and to my relief, they actually stopped. It was a dark sedan, and when the driver rolled down his window, I could see it was a man who looked to be in his 30s. He was smoking a cigarette and studying me with an expression that was hard to read in the dim light. "Car trouble?" he asked, though the answer was pretty obvious. "Yeah, engine just died on me," I replied. "I don't suppose you could give me a lift to the nearest town, or maybe I could use your phone to call for help." He took a long drag from his cigarette, still looking me over. There was something in his manner that made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. He kept glancing at his mirrors like he was checking to see if anyone else was around. "Well, I guess I could give you a ride," he said slowly. "Hop in." Every instinct I had was screaming at me not to get in that car with him. Maybe it was the way he kept looking around, or the slight smirk he gave me, or just a gut feeling, but something felt very wrong with this guy. "You know what? I actually just remembered I have a friend who's on his way. Should be here any minute, but thanks for stopping." The man's expression changed slightly, and that smirk became more pronounced. "Sure thing," he said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe me at all. He drove off, leaving me alone again on the dark highway. I immediately regretted not getting his license plate number, though I wasn't sure why I felt that would be important. What followed was the longest hour of my life. No other cars came by, and I was starting to seriously worry about spending the entire night stranded on this deserted road. I tried walking back toward the town I'd come from, but after about 10 minutes, I realized it was pointless. At this pace, it would take me all night to cover any meaningful distance, and walking alone on a dark highway seemed even more dangerous than staying with my car. I was leaning against the driver's side door, fighting off exhaustion, when I saw headlights coming from the opposite direction. I straightened up and prepared to wave them down, grateful for another chance at rescue. As the car got closer, something about it looked familiar. When it slowed down and pulled over, my heart sank. It was the same dark sedan from before. I was almost certain of it. But when the driver rolled down the window, it was a woman. She looked to be in her late 20s, with shoulder-length brown hair and a nervous smile. "Do you need help?" she asked, but there was something odd about the way she said it, like she didn't really want to be asking. I was confused. Was this the same car with a different driver? In the darkness, it was hard to be sure. All dark sedans look pretty similar, and I hadn't gotten a good look at the first car anyway. "I just need a ride to the nearest town," I told her, "anywhere with a phone or a gas station." She nodded quickly and unlocked the passenger door. "Get in." Despite my reservations about the previous driver, I wasn't about to pass up another offer of help. I opened the door and slid into the passenger seat, immediately grateful to be moving again. But within seconds, I knew something was terribly wrong. The woman was staring straight ahead with wide, frightened eyes. Her hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. When I thanked her for picking me up, she didn't respond. She didn't ask what had happened to my car or where exactly I wanted to go. She just drove in complete silence, looking like she was barely holding herself together. "Are you okay?" I asked after a few minutes of uncomfortable silence. She glanced at me briefly, and I could see she was scared, really scared. She looked like someone who was being forced to do something against her will. That's when I noticed something moving in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, or maybe the reflection of something outside the car. But when I turned to look directly into the back seat, my blood turned to ice. There was someone sitting behind me. It was the man from before, the one who had offered me a ride earlier. He was hunched down, trying to stay out of sight, but now that I'd spotted him, he sat up straight. Even in the darkness of the back seat, I could see he was furious. The pieces fell into place immediately. This woman wasn't helping me out of kindness. She was being forced to pick me up by the man in the back seat. We were both victims. I looked ahead and saw a sign for a gas station 2 miles away. "Please," I said to the woman, trying to keep my voice steady, "pull into that gas station up ahead." Before she could respond, the man in the back seat spoke up. "Keep driving," he ordered her. "Don't stop anywhere." Now I understood why the woman had looked so terrified. She was trapped in this situation just like I was. But as we approached the gas station exit, she did something incredibly brave. Instead of following the man's orders, she suddenly jerked the steering wheel to the right and hit the brakes hard, turning into the gas station at the last second. The car skidded to a stop just short of the gas pumps. "Go," she yelled at me, and we both immediately jumped out of the car. We ran for the gas station doors while the man scrambled from the back seat to the front. By the time we got inside, he was already driving away, tires squealing as he sped back onto the highway. The night clerk called the police while the woman and I tried to catch our breath and process what had just happened. She told me that the man had approached her at a rest stop about an hour earlier, forced his way into her car, and made her drive around looking for stranded motorists. I was apparently his first target. The police arrived quickly and took our statements. They put out an alert for the car and the man, though I doubted they'd find him. He was probably already ditching the vehicle and finding another way to continue whatever sick game he was playing. I never did find out what happened to that man or whether he was caught. The woman and I both gave detailed descriptions to the police, and they assured us they would do everything they could to track him down. But predators like that are good at disappearing when they need to. The gas station attendant helped me arrange for a tow truck, and I eventually made it to my destination. Working the overnight shift at a small highway diner is the kind of job most people take when they don't have many other options. That was certainly the case for me. My friend owned the place and offered me the position when I needed something to help me get by financially for a while. It wasn't glamorous work, but it had its advantages. The diner was a classic roadside stop, the kind you see dotting highways across America. Single-story building with large windows, neon signs advertising coffee and pie, and a parking lot that could accommodate both cars and large trucks. It catered mostly to long-haul truckers and travelers who needed a place to grab a quick meal and coffee before getting back on the road. During the day shift, the place could get reasonably busy, especially during peak travel times. But the overnight shift, which ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., was usually dead quiet. I might see 2 or 3 customers during an entire 8-hour shift, usually truckers stopping for coffee and maybe a slice of pie before continuing their journey. The isolation didn't bother me much. I was naturally more of a night person anyway, and the quiet gave me time to read, listen to music, or just think about life while I cleaned and maintained the equipment. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and my friend let me take home leftover food from the day shift. This particular night started out exactly like every other night I'd worked there. I arrived at 10:30, got the rundown from the evening shift manager, and settled in for what I expected to be another peaceful night of minimal customer interaction. The first few hours were completely routine. A trucker stopped by around midnight for coffee and directions to a truck stop up the road. Another customer came in around 1 a.m., ordered pie and coffee, and sat at the counter reading a paperback novel while he ate. Both were friendly, normal interactions that ended with the customers paying their bills and heading back to their vehicles. After that second customer left, I had the place to myself for over an hour. I used the time to clean the coffee makers, wipe down all the tables and counters, and restock the supplies. The radio was playing classic rock at low volume, and I was actually enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. That's when the first truck pulled into the parking lot. I could see the headlights sweep across the dining room windows as the vehicle turned in from the highway. It was a large truck, bigger than the usual pickups and sedans we got during the night shift, but truckers were common customers, so I didn't think much of it. 2 men got out and walked toward the entrance. Through the windows, I could see they both looked tired and road-worn, which was typical for long-haul drivers. I positioned myself behind the counter and got ready to take their order. They came through the front door and approached the counter, both ordering black coffee to go. While I prepared their drinks, one of them went to use the restroom and the other sat at the counter. "Hey," the remaining customer said, "I've got a weird question for you. You're not here alone, are you?" The question caught me off guard. It wasn't the kind of thing customers usually asked, and something in his tone made me hesitate before answering. "Yeah, it's just me tonight," I replied honestly. "It's been pretty quiet, so I don't mind the solitude." He looked surprised by my answer, almost concerned. "Well, just be careful," he said. "When we were pulling into the parking lot, I saw someone at the side of the building. Looked like he was trying to stay out of sight, but I thought maybe he worked here or something. That's why I asked if you were alone." I felt a chill run down my spine. What did he look like? Couldn't see much in the dark, but it was definitely a man. Medium height, wearing dark clothes. He ducked around the corner when our headlights hit him. By then, his friend had returned from the restroom. I handed them both their coffee and thanked them for the warning. They paid for their drinks and headed back to their truck, leaving me alone again with this new information to worry about. I immediately went to the front windows and looked out at the parking lot and the areas around the building that I could see. Everything appeared normal. The parking lot was empty except for my car, and I didn't see any signs of anyone lurking around the building. But the trucker's warning had me on edge. I decided to do a quick walk around the outside of the building just to make sure everything was secure. We didn't get many problems at the diner, but it was an isolated location, and strange things could happen on quiet highways late at night. I stepped outside and walked the perimeter of the building. The diner was surrounded by a small parking lot on the front and sides, with dense woods extending behind it for miles. There were a couple of outdoor lights that illuminated the immediate area around the building, but beyond that, everything was dark. I didn't see anyone, but the woods behind the building felt ominous. The trees were thick and dark, creating plenty of places for someone to hide if they wanted to watch the diner without being seen. I finished my circuit of the building quickly and went back inside, making sure to lock the door behind me. For the next hour, I kept glancing out the windows, but I didn't see anything unusual. No more customers came by, and traffic on the highway was minimal. I started to think maybe the trucker had just seen shadows or the reflection of his own headlights and mistaken it for a person. Around 3 a.m., I decided to take a bathroom break. The restroom was in the back of the building, down a short hallway from the main dining area. I was in there for maybe 5 minutes, checking my phone and trying to stay awake. While I was in the restroom, I heard the distinct sound of the front door opening. The door had a bell that chimed whenever someone entered or left, and it was a sound I heard dozens of times every shift. "Welcome," I called out in my standard customer service voice as I quickly finished up and headed back to the main dining area. But when I emerged from the hallway, there was no one there. I looked around the entire dining room, checking every booth and table, but the place was completely empty. I went to the front door and looked out, but there were no vehicles in the parking lot except my car. The door definitely had a distinctive sound when it opened, and I knew I'd heard it, but somehow no one was there. I tested the door several times, pushing it open and closing, and it made the same chiming sound each time. It wasn't the kind of noise that could be mistaken for something else, and the door was heavy enough that it wouldn't just blow open on its own. I was starting to feel genuinely unsettled. Between the trucker's warning about someone lurking around the building and now the mysterious door opening, I was beginning to think something was seriously wrong. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. Maybe I had imagined the door sound, or maybe it was some kind of mechanical issue with the bell. I decided to focus on my work and try to put the strange incidents out of my mind. I went back to the kitchen area to finish cleaning the dishes from the evening shift. The dishwasher was loud, and I had to focus on scrubbing to get the stubborn stains off some of the plates and glasses. The noise and the physical activity were actually comforting, giving me something concrete to focus on instead of worrying about mysterious sounds and phantom customers. But while I was working, I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. It sounded like footsteps. I immediately turned off the water and put down the dish I was washing. The kitchen was now silent, but I could have sworn I'd heard someone walking around in the dining room. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" No response. I dried my hands and walked back toward the dining room, my heart starting to race. As I rounded the corner from the kitchen, I saw him. There was a man sitting at the counter. He looked to be around 40 years old, with graying hair and a scraggly beard. He was wearing a navy blue hoodie that looked like it had seen better days, and he was smiling at me in a way that made my skin crawl. "Coffee, please," he said calmly, as if his sudden appearance in my empty diner was the most natural thing in the world. I was too shocked to respond immediately. This man had somehow entered the building without me hearing the door, and he'd made his way to the counter without making any noise until I'd heard those footsteps in the kitchen. "How did you get in here?" I managed to ask. His smile widened. Through the door, of course, same as everyone else. But I knew he hadn't come through the front door. I would have heard the bell, and I'd been checking the parking lot regularly. There were no vehicles out there except mine. Against my better judgment, I started brewing coffee for him. I was afraid of what might happen if I refused, and I was hoping that if I gave him what he wanted, he would leave quickly. "Just you here tonight, huh?" he said, echoing what the trucker had asked earlier. "Bet it gets lonely. Doesn't look like you get many customers at this hour." "Sometimes," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He kept talking, asking about my schedule and how long I'd been working there. I gave vague, non-committal answers, not wanting to provide him with any specific information about my routines or when I would be working alone again. There was something deeply unsettling about this man, beyond just his mysterious arrival. The way he looked at me, the tone of his voice, the inappropriate personal questions, everything about him set off alarm bells in my head. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he finished his coffee and stood up. He left money on the counter and headed toward the door, giving me that same creepy smile as he left. I watched through the windows as he walked away from the building, but I never saw him get into a vehicle. He just walked up to the edge of the highway and disappeared into the darkness. I immediately locked the front door and turned off the exterior lights, hoping to make the diner look closed. My hands were shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. Who was this man, and how had he gotten inside without me noticing? And what did he mean when he said he'd see me around? I spent the next 15 minutes watching the windows, terrified that he would come back. Every shadow outside looked like a potential threat, and every small sound made me jump. That's when I heard it again, the sound of a door opening. But this time, I was standing in the main dining room where I could see the front door clearly. It hadn't opened. The sound was coming from